Howard or not?
He's in training.
And we're here.
All right. Good afternoon. Call the Blight Committee meeting to order. So we'll move on to item 2.1, just a discussion on blight in the community and what we're going to be doing, kind of this spring and addressing some of the issues that are currently, there's Roger, that are currently out there. Springtime is usually when we go out. Police go out and they do their sweep for blight in both residential and commercial areas. And I think we'll be doing that status quo this year. I think the police do a very good job. Chief, we roughly have an 80 to 90% compliance rate once we send out letters.
Correct.
Yep. And so, one of the issues that I know comes up is items in the setback. Looking at items in the setback, we did have a council work study session where we brought kind of that item to the council to kind of discuss and see what they wanted to do with stuff in the public right of way, stuff in the setback. And at that point in time, they kind of had the general consensus not to enforce, to have us enforce that as it impacted a lot of the businesses in the area, and how, do you cite some and not others, and, what that really looks like. And so kind of looking at this meeting today to see if that's kind of the same direction we want to go, and throw out there that we will have a new city attorney, starting May 1st. And I think at that point, city staff would like to meet with the city attorney to go over our zoning ordinance, what we have for blight, to see, how they see enforcement going, get their buy-in, because they're the one who's going to have to charge those if there are citations being written. And then once we meet with them internally with staff, we would call another blight meeting and have them present here to present, their findings and see what they, say as far as that goes. And, their recommendation could be enforce what's on the books, and we'll have to take a look at that, and maybe city council makes that decision as we present, kind of arguments on all sides, what it means to staff time, cost of staff to do it, any other miscellaneous charges that we may incur, cost to businesses, and see if that's something they want to do, or potentially look at rewriting, the zoning ordinance to conform to a level of that council would be comfortable enforcing at some point, looking at that. So I kind of open it up to everyone here, collect their thoughts. I know Dave has worked on the zoning ordinance, so looking at city code, zoning ordinance, rewriting that, will be a little daunting, but, we can certainly entertain any motion.
Our new zoning ordinance went into effect last Sunday, so Monday was the first official day. And
You're gonna need a mic, Dave.
Oh, my.
yeah, I do. And so the ordinance is, it covers all of the things that you would typically find in a zoning ordinance, perhaps in a little bit greater detail than in the past. So they're same requirements. I think we try to best as possible to mirror the current ordinance. I think, in some areas, we viewed some of our standards as, like, especially with setbacks, is looking more so at new development, what the setbacks would be rather than current development. That we, I think, maybe increase some of our setback distances. We added new zoning district, though, which allowed us to adjust some of those, you know. And we kept, for example, in our I-3, we're still 5 feet on our side yards. Our I-2, we went to 10 feet on our side yards. Our front yards, we pretty much kept them the same in the industrial zone. Our I-1 has always been our planned industrial district, and that has tax because that's supposed to be our clean industry. Our I-2 is kind of more so for, well, it's for every type of industrial use that we allow, maybe put it that way. The I-3 is kind of the, for lack of a better term, is the storage building zoning district. You know, other than that, you know, go ahead.
I was up early this afternoon, I haven't got this new zoning ordinance memorized yet. But John, you want to talk about that a little bit, when I asked about the parking, you know, what we have today, when it kicks in? Or when?
Guys, if I can interrupt here. Dave correctly pointed out that there are adjustments to the setback distances in the new zoning ordinance. Those apply, okay, and I'm speaking as the current assistant city attorney with the understanding that depending upon what the council decides, there may be someone else advising the city from May 1st onwards. But until that happens, it's my position that the setbacks apply to the location of buildings and structures. For purposes of blight, and Elwood is not going to be attending today?
No, he's out of
That's
training.
unfortunate. Because for purposes of blight, the question can come up with the location of materials in the setback area. The previous code prohibited storing materials in any required setbacks. My interpretation of that, assuming I was trying to find where that provision exists in the new ordinance, and I couldn't find it. I'm sure that it's in there, but I just couldn't find it in the 214 pages. If it's similar to what we have now, that applies to whatever the setback is. You're not grandfathered in. If you previously had 5 feet, if your building is 10 feet off, or if your building is 20 feet off of the side yard line in an industrial zone, and it had been 5 and it's now 10, you can't put materials in the 10 feet. If that's what the prohibition is on storage materials. It's the same language, that is the same. I mean, it's not the same. It changes to whatever that setback distance is. So that's how it would have to be enforced. It's not construction of a building. It's because that stuff can get moved on a daily basis. And just because you might have had something there for 5 years and now it's gone, that doesn't mean you can put something back there now.
Okay, so that's your interpretation of how that
Absolutely.
provision should be
Absolutely.
enforced.
Yeah. I don't think there's any question whatsoever. We're talking about materials, movable items. The setbacks generally start with the notion of where is your building located vis-a-vis the lot lines and the right-of-way lines and everything else. Then we've got other provisions that talk about movable personal property, materials, And that's something that changes every day. It's a new, I mean, if that's the gauge, is you can't do it in the setback area, we change the setback area, that changes that. I think that would be crystal clear. I think any judge would interpret it
But
that way.
that's my I went on tour again today. Man, I don't wanna be the officer that's gotta show up at these 18 places that have been here for 30 years. I calced out Nuvera, their storage area, can't have it there anymore. It's such a shallow lot, we enforce the setback. Hey, you can't use this property, you got 10 feet you can store stuff on. What are we gonna do? I mean, Reinhardt's Repair, put your boat somewhere else, man, they can't be there.
Well, now that's kind of a unique
I mean-
situation, Dave, because it's storage, it's in a public right-of-way that's not likely to ever be used. I think there's ways of addressing that, maybe
There's
with a
house
license
across the
agreement.
street.
Maybe if there,
Yeah.
if there was notice and an agreement and there was consent and there was a license agreement. But I think you've pointed out the innumerable businesses that are technically in violation of this. And I've spoken with your city engineer in the past about what is necessary to enforce this, and basically, especially if it's something having to do with right-of-way, or even just a side yard on a lot line. Basically, if we end up in court with a property owner, we're probably going to have to hire a licensed surveyor to come in and confirm where the lot line is and where the setback line is. And I'm pretty sure that if we bring in somebody like Bolton and Mank, between viewing the site and expert testimony, you're looking at $1,000 a pop every time we have to take somebody to court, just for their fees. So it becomes something that, quite frankly, might be very, very difficult to enforce if we're going to be going after everybody who's involved. And one answer would be to reconsider what provisions we've got about storage, and that could be something that could be done in a district-by-district basis. We might definitely want to have something in residential districts that we may not think is necessary in industrial or business. But I just think, as a committee, we got to understand that. We're going to talk about enforcement on this issue.
Roger, would we have any grounds to, just an out loud thought, for fire and safety, for emergency personnel, if there's a fire and they got to get to a structure and it's blocked, say, because all around this building, stuff.
Yeah.
And then just an out loud,
No,
why do you have a setback if there's a gas leak, if they can't get to the gas lines?
Absolutely, Larry, that's
And that's
the
where
reason
our
why,
blight.
why we've got this on the books, but then it's a question about enforcing it.
Yeah.
And, maybe you do something, I mean, every property owner who's technically in violation might be violating a different way. It might be because it's, something facing the street, the right-of-way. It might be on the side yards, might be on the backyard. Public safety may be more of a concern, depending upon their building, at any one of those boundaries. But we've got, a cover-it-all, provision, and you can't make exceptions saying, well, we're going to enforce it against you in your side yard because that could be a fire hazard, but the guy next to you who's got it, a violation in the front yard, we're going to let him alone. I mean, you got to be consistent.
Correct. And then here's another thing I've noticed in our zoning, when we've had some of our newer sheds being built in businesses. And I'll just give it an example, say, Gog Sheet Metal bought the former MGC building on North Front Street. And when we were doing the rezoning, we stated in there, no outdoor storage. Well, define outdoor storage, when you see rooftop air conditioner units and other stuff, So that takes staff time, who's gonna go check all those places, and we've had that in the last couple of years. I mean, I can think of a shed on South Minnesota Street where Acre was gonna build, you can build a shed, but then no outdoor storage, And, so we've put restrictions in, but then it takes an enforcement person.
Well, right, and I think the toughest thing, I know from the city staff, law enforcement, our office, is consistency.
Correct.
And, it's something where, they aren't always easy to know when you see them, but if you do know where that line is, as far as the setback, and if there's something over the line, you got a violation. And the outdoor storage, I mean, that, if it's not a setback issue, the outdoor storage is a whole nother thing that is addressed in many different ways in the new ordinance. And some of it is screening and things like that. I think some of these, it's a question on, are these new provisions on storage applying to the existing units of property owners? Because, again, storage is movable property.
Yeah.
It's not, your building is over the setback right now. Well, it's pre-existing. That's grandfathered in. But this is something that is not a building. So,
And I went through the new zoning. Yeah, John gave me a new copy last week, and and just an example, just like auto repair shops or auto body or something. It says screening in there, and providing, and just we've got some things highlighted, but so for every auto repair place, technically it shouldn't be storing the stuff the way it's kind of written. If I interpret it right, they're reading where.
again, with the 200 and some pages, I would need to go and see exactly how that's written, 'cause I know we did talk about that, so.
Yeah.
400 and some?
Yeah, it's 200 double-sided.
Okay, well, I'm reading two at once. I got two eyes, I can.
Yeah. But I think we, as a council, we need to decide, how much do we need to hire another staff to enforce, or what are we gonna, be in the business of? We
Right,
have
I
to
mean,
be consistent.
that's one aspect of it. I think the other part of it is, staff put an awful lot of work into the new ordinance, but it's a work in progress. I think we all understand that as applied, there may be the need to amend it in the future. We started out with the best, set of, requirements that we could come up with, but as implemented in this city, maybe it needs amendment, that to be determined, so.
And we might get a different perspective from a different attorney here in a month.
Yeah,
too.
you might, but I guess if I'm the guy who's got to be doing this, I want to be able to look any citizen in the eye and tell them that we're treating them just the same as we would anybody else in this town. And it doesn't matter how big their business is or how small, the rules apply to everybody.
You're right, it's a hard one to interpret and whatnot. I go out to some of these bigger areas with the storage buildings. They have enough property. It's not stored in the setback, but it's the same type of material that you're gonna call the next guy for. That's where I got a hard time. Same thing. So we're enforcing you're too close to the line.
Well, I understand that.
Yeah.
And you're right, everything that's there is supposed to be enforced, but if we are taking action on the setback storage, I guess if we can focus on that without getting into all the questions that could arise with otherwise, compliant storage, that's something that's a problem. And, we need to decide, I guess, are we going to make a recommendation to the council? We don't have to. But would the committee make a recommendation to the council on how to address this? Because it's now becoming a problem. If we've got, any complaints about someone not complying with the setback storage issues, and they're bringing up the 15 other businesses that are doing the same thing, what are we going to do? Are we going to be, pursuing action against everybody who's doing it? Is that the direction we want to go? And it's not the council's decision really to decide, are we going to enforce something or not? That's up to staff and law enforcement and the city attorney. We're the enforcement branch. If the council doesn't like the policy, and that it's just something that it's too damaging to business, to property owners. You know, it's too much to be trying to regulate. That's for the council to decide. But once it's in place, we're supposed to enforce it.
So how do we handle situations where, you know, say properties, there's been nothing there for 5 years, and then all of a sudden, in the last 6 months, the whole side of the building is plumb full? And
Well, it's, if it's in violation, it's in violation.
yeah, and it shouldn't be picked and choose.
That's right. But again, if that property owner says, okay, here's the other addresses, and staff goes out and verifies it, then we're on every. And so,
I mean, an example, Roger, are we gonna go after the railroad?
I don't know what they got going on.
Stuff sits for 6, 8, 10 months in the setback.
The same thing. Is the same thing. So, I mean, part of this, and Dave can speak more eloquently on this than me, but, I mean, there's a reason why we do have restrictions on what you put in the setback, is because it just doesn't look good at all. You'd like to have some clear area from stuff and wherever that boundary line or the right-of-way is. And I guess the question is, with how property is being used, especially in the industrial areas, is that a trade-off the council would want to make? That it's not going to look any better, but we're also not going to be ending up in court with 15 or 20 property owners having to bring in surveyors to testify about where the line is, and then here's where their stuff is.
Would we be out of line to ask the property owners to put screening in? You know?
Well,
put a
I mean,
fence
they
up?
don't have to, except as the
Fence
code,
in. If
as,
it's, say if it's a repair shop and all of a sudden they, all the stuff, put a fence up on the line and,
well, there's different issues here. That's the whole question of outdoor storage. Otherwise lawful, you know, all lawful that it's outside of the setback area, but I'm storing stuff outside. And that's addressed in the new ordinance. And I don't know if you guys have got the chapter and verse handy there to cite, and to the
Yeah,
extent.
if they do an expansion of their outdoor storage area, that would trigger the screening requirement.
Okay, what are you, have you got anything in specific you're looking at there, John, or?
Let me get there.
I would also note that a lot of the stuff that we're talking about would be a violation of our current ordinance. We don't even have to enact a new ordinance for some of these things that we're talking about to be effective. They're a violation of the old one.
No, I mean, the current one prohibits storing of materials within the setback area.
So does the old one.
No, I'm saying that, you're right, the old one, that's, right. So,
They both do. We're consistent there. And I also point out that other than the downtown area, every other community in the state of Minnesota has setback. I mean, this isn't something unique.
No, it's not unique, Dave, but I know enforcement, you're full of crap if you're telling me it's enforced in other cities, because I look all the time. I followed Mankato's cleanup. At the third year, they were back to the first year guys saying crap was, I mean, they're in place. I understand that. Don't tell me they're enforced.
well, everybody has setbacks,
Right.
but do they all have language prohibiting materials in a setback area?
Well, I'd have to read individual
Yeah.
ordinances.
Because that's the question we're talking about here. It's not.
I missed what you said about,
Do they enforce it or not? I look in every city that I get into. Like, wow.
well, I talked with Mike Fisher in North Mankato, and Mike said that some of their side yard stuff I know in the residential districts, he said they did enact a program to clean that up.
But didn't he also say that it took them how many years? And by the time they were on the third year,
30.
they were already
He
going
said
back to
3
the
years.
first year?
Yeah.
People, let's do it again.
Yeah.
Well, and that's, again, that's residential. And, you know, you can have different standards for different districts. That's why we have different districts. You don't have to have a one-size-fits-all if that's the way the council wanted to go.
I just think we have to be consistent and, you know, if,
That's just
just,
the question that I gotta have something to give to it, Eric Warmka and myself, because we're gonna get hammered down in that 2 districts. That's where it's all at. It's not in the rest of the city. Why are you enforcing it now? Because we decided to? I'm not gonna have the right answer.
Through my alley to my garage last night. I got 4 violations in my block.
In the alley area?
I can see from my alley.
Yeah.
I always stayed out of alleys, Dave. No, I mean,
Wanna-
I know.
I was paging through and I wanted to get back to the provisions about when these things start to kick in. And I'm just reading through a few of our screening requirements, and specifically when we're addressing an issue like, for instance, here, trash or recycling collection areas. Okay. We say, following the effective date of this ordinance, all newly constructed or remodeled buildings shall adhere to the following regulations.
What page is that on?
This is on 242, and this is just an example.
Yeah. So notice that the term, that how that sentence started, following the effective date of this ordinance.
And it says buildings shall adhere.
No.
Well,
It
and
says,
this is an example. If you go to off-street parking lots, which is on the next page, following the effective date of this ordinance, all newly constructed parking areas shall adhere to the following regulations. So
right.
that's,
That's newly constructed parking areas. Previous in the trash or recycling, that's talking about newly constructed buildings.
right, and if there's a newly constructed building, they would have to have a trash and recycling area, therefore that has to be screened. That's what we're saying in our new ordinance. We've done that in the past through probably development agreement or a
Actually,
conditional
we did
use
that-
permit.
We did that a long time ago with new development.
we had that with like Family
Right,
Dollar.
but then the question is, what language would talk about the issue we're discussing now, which is the question of how do we interpret any restrictions on storage within a setback area?
Okay.
I mean, because these are both, you know, pretty unique provisions here.
Sure. Well, we have a couple provisions regarding storage. One is this is outdoor storage areas. These requirements do not apply to properties located in the I-2 zoning district, so this is screening in particular. But what I need to go back and find here, you guys, is where they discuss when these go into effect. Because I don't believe when we were writing this that the intent was that all of the outdoor storage that is existing currently, now that this goes into effect, we're gonna tell them they all need to be screened. That
is
wasn't the
correct.
intent.
No, I think, John, in all of our discussions, that was the understanding.
But I just need to find it.
Now, I would point out that our definition of yard is the same as our definition of yard was prior to the adoption of new ordinance. And that definition says that the yard area is from the ground to the sky. And so, you know, you have side yards, front yards, and then you have setback within yard areas. And so it's always been, I believe, our interpretation, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that the side yards were supposed to be kept clean.
And I'm just gonna be looking for, why are we enforcing it now?
Well, I think the question is coming up is that if we've got, whether it's Elwood or any law enforcement who's talking to a property owner about having stuff in the setback, and that property owner is saying, what about everybody on this list? Then that opens the door to us having to be consistent. And then we are having to go through that list, see if this person is right. If he is, we should be following up on it. And then we're dealing with a lot of large and long existing businesses in here that otherwise people have not been complaining about until this person raises the issue. Now we have someone complaining about it.
Well, Chris, how do we handle a situation now if there's a call in or a complaint? Is it being enforced?
Currently, no, because we're following what council had previously instructed us at the work study session, that we weren't going to enforce public right-of-way or setback at this point.
Well, I wish, again,
It's
Elwood
pretty
was here.
broad, though.
I wish Elwood was here because I think there is more than that. I mean, it is getting followed up on.
It is.
Elwood is contacting the property owner. Sometimes the police are contacting the property owner. Are we taking that property owner to court? Thus far, not that I'm aware of. I haven't seen anything going through our office. But it's now reaching a point where that might have to happen. If the issue is going to be pursued, it's got to be pursued consistently. So, and I think for purposes of our meeting today, we've kind of been bouncing back and forth between this whole question of general outdoor storage and then the more limited question of storing materials in the setback area.
Oh, and the parking issue.
Well, parking kind of overlaps into that setback
Yeah,
thing.
because we have a lot of them.
Yeah, but, that's where it's the immediate concern has to do with storing stuff
I know where that
within
one
the
is.
setback areas.
And John had looked that up earlier today with that parking issue.
Right. So basically, to summarize what our ordinance says is that if there's parking areas that are already created and being used as parking areas, those are allowed to exist as they are today. If they do any changes, resurfacing, reconstruction of their parking lot, anything like that, they have to come into compliance with the code.
But how do you define a parking lot where they just pull up on the grass next to the sidewalk?
Well, we actually do define parking lot by hard surfaced area. I can pull the definition right here, if we want to read that. So, a parking lot, according to this ordinance, is an open, hard-surfaced area other than a street or public right-of-way available to the public to be used for storage for limited periods of time of operable passenger vehicles and commercial vehicles. Such storage may be for compensation, free, or as an accommodation to residents or of a multifamily dwelling or clients and customers of a business. I should note, though, when we talk about hard-surfaced, we also intended and did include gravel. That doesn't just mean blacktop or concrete.
Or bituminous.
In other words, so open grass right up to the sidewalk that they're using now in commercial and industrial districts. Shell's warehouse, Dave, they park there every day, 5 cars in the mud up to the sidewalk. Every day.
Well, that language that John was talking about, I think I've got the right language here. Existing off-street parking areas which do not conform to the requirements of this section, but which were in conformance with the requirements of the code at the time the parking facilities were established, are permitted to continue as legal non-conforming uses. So then you get into a fact question of, if they're parking on the lawn or in dirt, I'm assuming they're probably going to say, well, that's a pre-existing use. Is it an established parking area? It's their yard.
Okay,
Maybe.
our definition would say that that's not a parking area. And
Well, it's not now, but for purposes of this retroactivity provision, it just says off-street parking areas. It doesn't say parking lot. It's parking areas.
It's one of those, Dave, when we had calced it when they built the warehouse. So that area is now full of semi-trailers and junk. there's no place for the employees to park. So they park every day, they pull up in the mud right next on the sidewalk. I remember it well. Everything else is semis on the dike, junk along the building.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Well, see, and that's an issue with a particular property owner. If they've decided to use their available open space to put trucks and trailers and junk instead of employee parking, maybe they've got to come up with some alternative arrangements unless we do something different with the code.
So we just go down the street and we got a unique situation at every property, basically, and.
Every
Well,
property is unique and every
Yep,
use
and
is
we'll-
unique.
Yep,
And, right. And you got to try and come up with a
consistent.
code that is going to satisfy the council that it's generally going to be fair as it's going to have to be applied. Because you can't pick and choose. And some of this is going to be a trade-off for appearance, maybe even public safety, versus being business friendly.
Well, the public, I get that part, public safety. I'm not ever gonna argue that. But it's, what do we do with the pre-existing, just over years?
I should note, since Elwood's not here too, for when we're doing enforcement, because I help him with enforcement too, 50% of the time you send that first letter, it gets cleaned up, you contact the property owner, you're good to go. The other 50% of the time takes 4 or 5 letters, finally takes a letter from the city attorney to get them to clean it up, and then they clean it up. 2 months later, it's back there again. So I should just note that these things are often reoccurring. They might go away for a temporary time period, and then they'll come back again. So just to note that there's I would say fairly substantial amount of time following up on each one of these issues.
I would agree with everything John just said. We don't see them usually until they get to the multi-letter stage. We're not aware of all the other ones that you guys are working on, but we do see recidivism where it happens again after a period of time elapses, so.
To summarize, Chris, we worked on junk cars for a while. And then, so last time we met was what, a year ago?
Yeah, about
Approximately a year ago.
more or less.
And so that was the focus. And now,
And I would say at this point, kind of continue that practice until we can figure out a way, again, a general compromise between business friendly, public health and safety, again, stuff in the setback that absolutely is a health and safety hazard, absolutely we'll deal with, because, to me, that's unacceptable at the end of the day,
Yeah.
health and safety, absolutely number one.
safety is fire also, you're saying,
Well,
so it
but
should
again,
be fun.
it will change, less than a month from now. But as a person who would have to enforce this, whoever that person might be, if what they're relying upon for enforcement is a violation of materials in a setback area, I mean, the ultimate motive might have been because it's a public safety issue. But if what you're relying on to get them to be disciplined, to get it out of there, is that you can't put it where you're putting it, we still have the same problem. And, the fact that we're going after you because it really is public safety, you got combustible things and there's no place, for fire equipment to go, that's all well and good, but it's still, the fault is having it in the setback. And then that opens that door to every other violator in town.
Yeah.
So, and I guess, I don't think that Dave or John have looked at doing any kind of revisions to this new ordinance on this question. They would probably be looking at some direction from the council if the council was interested in doing that. Because correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but you're not seeing that as being appropriate. Would that be right?
I mean, I think what our intention is that if there are things that are really out of line, that, you know, specific things, we'll address them. But we would like probably direction from the council if that were to be the case. And we'd probably have to do quite a bit of background research to make sure that really that what we have written and what's being proposed are not kind of conflicting. I mean, I'll tell you what, we've tested this thing out a lot in the last few weeks or last week already, since Monday. And so far so good.
Yeah, I would, I don't know, if we want to immediately jump into looking at revisions to this ordinance. Now, we clearly understand that, or had anticipated that 6 months from when it became effective, that we would be coming back with a bunch of potential changes to be considered by the Planning Commission and the City Council. Because we know there are going to be mistakes that have been made. It's just part of the process. Brian Gramitz used to say the same thing. You know, 6 months from now, you guys are going to be back with a whole sheet of things that need to be changed. It's just part of the process. So I would think, though, it would be nice to get down the road a little bit so we know more about what those areas are, rather than immediately doing something and then going another 6 months and then having to come back with some more changes. So
I understand. I mean, but and again, you shift here, but, you know, this is kind of an immediate issue.
It is.
This can't wait 6 months. If we've got anyone complaining about somebody violating the setback, storage issues, we should address that. We can't just blow that off for 6 months. It should be dealt with. And if we're going to be enforcing it, and if that defendant is saying, what about the other 15 businesses, we got to follow up with the other 15 businesses. I don't think it can wait that long myself, but I guess right now I don't know that there is anything pending, but, you know, something where if complaints come up, I guess they will have to be dealt with.
Yeah, and I would agree with Roger on that. You know, this is something, if we're going to bring it to council, it's something we should bring sooner, you know, rather than later, just because, again, it's spring, police is going to be out enforcing, you know, the blight ordinance, you know, kind of along the same standards that we did last year. You know, and what is that happy medium that we can look at, you know, internally as staff, you know, because again, not all businesses are going to be happy, and, you know, we as the city may not be happy with kind of what that looks like. But again, you know, to Larry's point, you know, maybe making people screen, I don't think that is a solution, or it's a potential solution. But again, coming from a place where every business has a fence, every resident has a fence, it's ugly. And those fences become blight. They become the blight at the end of the day, because you're looking at windscreening, you're looking at slats that break, fences that rust, and it just, well, I have a fence. I don't have to do anything now. You know, so it's a weird slope. Blight is that thing that's never going to go away. You're never going to solve it, but how do you control it at the end of the day? And so, you know, I would agree with Roger, if we're going to go down this road, look at setbacks. It's something we have to do sooner rather than later, you know, because it's going to come up.
Dave, I mean, we have 3 city places. We're in violation.
Yeah.
We have been for 30 years. Right up to the property line, the fence doesn't hide it. Storage.
What particular location?
MDC,
Material distribution, I was down by the.
Park and Rec.
Department today, just because there's that baseball fence there, everything is right up to the fence.
yeah.
That's the property line, I know it is there, where the building was built, we're in our own violation. They get the first letters. Practice what we preach.
No.
Nuvera's gonna have a fit. We don't have any outdoor storage then.
But, so I think it is something that we have to take a look at internally. We'll look at, Nuvera's property is kind of an example of what happens if we enforce setbacks. What does that shrink their property to? And then we can kind of come up with some suggestions. The council will get Roger in, and see what that kind of looks like.
City Manager Dalton, I do want to add that, if we are going to go down the enforcement line, it's probably imperative that we get a licensed land surveyor under contract for this work as well, because if we're going to have multiple instances, we should probably get a contract for this work. May get a better rate for it. And then I never even thought about expert witness time as well, city attorney or assistant city attorney Hippert, but that's an additional fee on top of that, probably $1,000 just to get them out and locate the pins and show us where the right of way or property lines are at. And then, expert witness time on top of that as well. So if that's a route you want to go, I'll have to send out emails so I can get some proposals for licensed land surveying services as well.
It's something that seems like it should be a real simple cut and dry case if it's a violation of the setback storage. But, most judges are going to say that we have the burden of proving where the line is. And proper way, the best way of doing that is to bring in a surveyor. And they're not going to commit to anything unless they go out and actually do the measurements and view the site. And we would have to do that in every case.
Chris, how did we come out last year with the one on Front Street there by the bridge?
So I know, so that was Raiders, right?
Yes.
So I know they were cited last year, right? And
Did they
fine.
say they were gonna clean anything up or do anything? Or
They make, again, it's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. They clean up, they're good for a while, then they just revert.
Notice anything that got cleaned up?
They made some progress,
Yeah, but it's already back to.
but it's back, and then they just
Three
repeat
trash
that
cars have
process.
Been there for 3 months.
Yep.
I get it. It's a continuing cycle.
But there's a case on theirs that could be like a front yard setback, but then you'd need a surveyor.
But they're also a licensed dealer, so their parking area
Yeah.
conforms, and they can be where they currently are. So, I mean, again,
Well, they're a licensed dealer, I get, yeah. But if it's not a defined surface, say of mud or whatever,
yeah.
But
You know,
that's
how
still
technical you wanna be.
I get the part, but it's not in the right of way that can be.
Yeah, I'm not.
No, not in the
I
right
know
of way,
that
yeah.
Raiders, because it was actually surveyed when they did the bridge. And
They're multiple feet in
Yeah.
the right of way.
Yeah.
Multiple feet, car lengths in the right of
car
way.
lengths into the right of way.
Yeah.
Because the pins were there by a licensed land surveyor.
Right. But it seems we get pointed to a lot, like why haven't they ever cleaned up?
I mean, and they do. The police officer, correct me if I'm wrong, chief
Gets
police
cited.
officer go out and they work with them, give them time, they correct, and then they just fall back into the same pattern. They're good for a while. Again, just much like Mankato or North Mankato, they go through 3-year process and then they start back over again. That's why Blight, the best PowerPoint I've ever seen in my life was about Blight, and the first slide was Blight is a losing battle, because it's just cyclical. You go, they clean up, and then it comes back again. You clean up, it comes back again. You're not going to solve it, but how do you get it under control? And I think as a city, law enforcement does a very good job. Like I said, they send out letters, 80 to 90% success rate, even with John going out for code violations. You know, you're having 50%, and then after they get their 4 or 5 letters, most of them comply after when they get the city attorney letter, correct?
Well, it for sure catches their attention,
Yeah.
and then we usually get a phone call and try to reach a resolution.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, we do our part. I think for the most part, residents and businesses comply as much as humanly possible. But again, it's just the pattern. It comes back again, and we deal with it. And that's why every spring, after the snow melts, the police go out, do a residential and commercial sweep, and that's kind of our big time to do it, because snow melts, things look a little worse for wear, and then it gets cleaned up, and then that again cycle repeats next year.
In my mind, if we go ahead with it, we're gonna take such a beating from businesses, it'll come to council to change the ordinance. Maybe I'm wrong, but
Yeah.
we're gonna take a beating.
You know,
And Runnings is gonna look at us like, what? They're in violation. Never had a complaint on it, they're in violation of stuff in the setback area. I mean, they are.
I mean, along the.
You
over
bet,
there.
that's a property line. Right there, the fence and the farm stuff, whatnot. It's, if you go by the T of the ordinance, you're in violation.
Joe, is that 100-foot right away? Street going by Runnings?
No, I'm not even talking that one, I'm talking about.
The Cashwise
Cashwise
parking.
and them, it's a property line.
Oh, the property line.
Yeah, I believe that's an
It's in direct
80-foot right
violation.
away.
We give them like an interim permit to just use it on their land.
So we give it to them, then who do we stop at? You're not Runnings, a big retail place, we're not giving it to you. I don't agree with that. Treat one, you treat them all.
you know,
I mean,
that's-
just because you're a big retailer in New Ulm, well, we'll give you special preference, we'll give you an, but you're the little guy, you don't mean nothing. I won't vote for that.
Yep.
But I mean, it's, just get ready for the repercussion. I spent the morning, and boy, oh boy,
Between car dealerships and everything else. I mean,
you know, and then
Car dealerships are not,
they're
we've got a
exempt.
They're exempt.
provision
Okay.
to address that.
not from the right of way,
No, not
Setback.
the right of way,
Yeah.
but
No.
the
setback, from the
Okay.
setback.
setback.
Yep.
Because
Not the right of way.
I believe that Ford and them, they're in the right of way.
Yep.
I believe Coles Wheelberg is in the right of way.
A's in the right of way.
Yep.
And if they push their trucks back, they're not going to have any room to maneuver their semis. That'll be
But
out.
what do we do?
Yeah.
That's complete code enforcement.
No, it's okay. You know,
It's cost us $50,000 in land and
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you're light.
line light.
If we're going after all of those, it's gonna add up really
I'm all
quickly.
right,
Yeah.
but then you go after all of them. All of them.
Mhm.
Not one place, two place, you go after all of them.
Right.
We're not gonna be popular. That's one item, though, we might have to make council aware of, that we're gonna be spending a lot of money.
I think typically we'd probably at least approach Bolton and Mank, or we could send out an RFP, I suppose.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I know I've used Bolton and Mank in civil private files, and, yeah, I mean, they charge expert witness fees. And if they're driving over here from
Yep.
Sleepy Eye, unless you got, kind of a fixed rate with them.
Yeah, it's,
from the
you're
time-
probably
they could be
talking,
working on something else.
yeah, it's,
Time
you're
they
probably
leave their
talking
office till the time they get back.
200 plus an hour,
At
probably.
least, I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
I'd ask kind of general consensus from anyone, if there is a general consensus, is this something, we want staff to look into to kind of address? Do we let stuff in the setback kind of go for the year and let us mull it over? Again, if we don't get a complaint, but really kind of take a look at it.
My all loud is I think got a complaint that should be addressed and be consistent. I got an example right next to one of my properties. I brought it up last November. Prior to November, there was nothing there for 5 years. November, moved in, jam-packed the whole side, 100 foot. not necessarily attractive. Just one example, but, you know, but that's just me. Maybe I'm, you know, just like to keep my property looking attractive also. But, I mean, sure, there's many other citizens that want to see their, you know, property values be maintained and look attractive, you know, rather than look at stuff. Smile out.
Because it will come back to council once the expense and complaints start rolling in. It will be on our agenda.
Yep.
Oh, I know that.
Because of, you know, why do we have an ordinance if we don't, you know?
But we haven't enforced it for
Correct.
that long, you know, again. You can choose to enforce, not enforce, again, but you look at the businesses that are here. It doesn't mean we can't, but you've allowed it to happen. It has happened. Again, how long have you been on council and never addressed the issue
For what issue?
for setback issues? You know, again, I mean, just
We're
across the
always
board.
rewriting the ordinances and going through it,
Yeah.
you know, that
You know,
went
and
back
it-
almost 9 years, you know,
Yeah, you know, and again,
till this last year.
I know you can't answer it, Roger, because every judge is different. When the judge starts seeing these city and home things come in 15, 20 at a time, that judge, what's going on? Did you change something? I mean,
That might occur to them, but I think most judges are just gonna do their
Okay,
job.
okay.
I don't think they're gonna question, you know, the strength of the case or, you know, who wins and who doesn't. But the reality is it's going to be very time consuming for staff, and it's gonna be expensive because of the need to bring in an expert witness. And, you know, ultimately, I mean, and we gotta have a zoning ordinance code that is good for this city, and it should be enforced. You know, the fact that maybe parts of this haven't been vigorously enforced is because there haven't been complaints. But if there are complaints, and that opens the door so that the floodgates have burst, and now we've got to go after 15, 20 business owners and property
oh,
owners.
I'll guarantee the floodgate, Roger, the floodgates will open. I'll guarantee that.
How does a city like Sleepy Eye handle a situation like this?
I don't know.
Or
yeah,
Mankato.
that I don't know.
Mankato?
Mankato kind of, like you said, Mankato went through it for residential.
Residential,
Took them 3 years.
yeah, not commercial.
They haven't done any. Yeah, North Mankato, yeah.
Right, yeah. I mean, it was not commercial, it was the residential.
It was all residential, took them 3 years. You know, and again, I look at it, you know, every city's different. So what's going to work for us at the end of the day? What's right for our community? You know, what Sleepy Eye does may not work for us. You know, again, I personally don't want to see a city of fences. It's not good. It's ugly. It's unattractive. I think, you know, I could even sit here and say we're probably in the top 5% of cleanest cities in the nation at this point. You know, we have a couple
See,
areas.
Chris, I don't know that anyone
Yeah.
is making complaints about general outdoor storage.
I know.
And again, I wish Elwood was here. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think the complaints are
Setback.
parking or storage within the setback or the right-of-ways. If there's anything coming up, that's the immediate issue.
You're right, you're right. That is the issue.
So,
And it's not a blight issue, it's a code issue for storage
well,
of materials.
you would call it blight because it's unsightly. That's one of the main reasons why you're not allowed to store things there. Right, Dave? I mean, wouldn't that be considered blight if you have materials in an area you aren't supposed to or not?
That's what I was getting at, Roger, with this new code of the setbacks, like Dave, you said, you changed to the 5 feet to 10 feet. So right now, in the I-3, where even though some of those sheds are at 10 feet, now they get 5 feet. Legally, he can store items in that 5 feet.
No, well,
No, he's in, the the I-3 stayed at the 5-foot
Oh,
setback.
okay, no, right, right.
But some
then,
of those
yes.
existing sheds, I know for a fact, are at 10 feet off the line. They can store
In that 5
material in
feet.
that 5 feet.
Right.
What the hell did we gain? What did we gain?
Yeah.
In my mind, not a goddamn thing. Excuse my French, we're on TV. But we didn't gain anything.
Nope.
That's the part I don't get.
What were we supposed to gain?
No, it's still unsightly. They can, let's say they have their pallets and drums and whatnot there. Technically, we can't do anything. He's not in the setback.
Well,
I can take it down to 2 right now.
but then I think we're talking two different things here. One is blight and how you
Right.
deal with blight, and the other is, what you want to allow, adjoining a building, which
but-
you can control by setback, I suppose, so you can make the setback 10 feet if you
But
want
blight,
to.
to some people, the pile of pallets is offensive. The next guy, hey, it's part of my operating business, get lost.
Yeah, I don't know how you define
Yeah,
blight for
there is
anyone
no
here.
definition to me for blight,
I mean, it's what you don't like.
what you don't like.
It's like, whatever, art or pornography, I know it when I see it, So,
I mean, in those cases, what did we solve? 2 blocks away, I'm in the I-3, guess what? I can store stuff in that 5 feet. The next lot over the I-2, you can't do that. I don't see any gain to it. That's the part I'm getting at.
I guess I'm confused, because what were we supposed to gain?
No, I mean, we did it, I remember the old code, the 5-foot setback. Some of those that we designated I-3 now, some of those sheds are at 10 feet from the property line.
So the
Our new
same
ordinance
as,
says
same as
5-foot
before.
setback, they can store it in that 5 feet.
Same as before. I mean, one of the intent was to maintain what we currently had as in our zoning regulation. So I don't know what should we have done?
You change the I-2 now to 10 feet, side yard setback.
Yeah.
Okay, you go down what I call Quonset Hut Road down there.
Yeah.
Where there's still a few vacant lots where sheds will come up on them.
Yeah.
Your setback is now 10 feet. Can't store anything there.
No, that's an I-3 zone. There'll probably be 5.
Are you talking about in the railroad tracks and valley
All the way down.
to the south end?
Yeah, they
That's
all
I-
get zoned I-3.
That's all I-3. Most of it is 5 feet.
Where it's
Where does it stop again, the new one?
so I don't have street addresses or streets here, but it looks like it's like 20, 16th south
And south.
and south is I-3.
All right, but what about everything this way?
Yeah, so
Still Quonset Hut Road.
yes. That's
That's what I'm
that's
getting at.
I-2. That's I-2.
Yes.
For how long?
That goes from 16th to 13th.
So but you follow what I'm saying? If they set the shed back, that was at the 10 feet, the old ordinance, we changed that, now it's 5 feet. You can store stuff in there, we didn't gain anything.
What are you saying? We didn't get anything
So,
for
I mean, out of
as
that, like the blight or the
Yeah.
setback,
sure.
yeah. Like, there's 2 of them down there right now, can't go to. They'll take the legal survey to prove, they'll say prove it, but I know they were set at that. Hell, you guys changed it, I can now set it 5 feet of my building, I still got 5 feet.
And the one where this kind of gets a little bit interesting is I don't know that it was the intent of the zoning ordinance to address blight.
But now it does,
Well, it addresses outdoor storage.
setback storage.
Yeah.
yeah, when we're talking about blight, there are other provisions in the
Yeah.
code about debris and garbage and vermin, and there's a lot of other sections that never were in Chapter 9 that really probably deal with most of the blight situations. But I think it overlaps, and I think that's part of the purpose of the new ordinance. It was the purpose of the previous ordinance with zoning is to have use that's consistent with what we want to have in particular parts of the town.
So, and that part I get.
the area that we kept zoned I-2 between, what was it, 12th to 16th is where the gas station is, where the Harmoning used to have his tank. Those are all I-2 uses.
Yeah, but doesn't
Those-
the I-2 go all the way up through the elevator and everything?
Well, yeah, from
Mm.
Seventh,
Yeah.
but it's because of the uses that are there,
Right.
not because of, there aren't storage buildings there. It's a different type of storage, maybe qualify that. But,
Like, I'm gonna back up to New Vera, the new standard,
yeah,
10 feet off of this side, 10 feet off of this side. They'll be here for some kind of variance. Or hotter than hell. Go buy it when you leave work.
no, I know what it looks
Yeah.
like.
That's the type of stuff we're not gonna be able to avoid.
Pre-existing stuff.
Parking was addressed, but setback was not addressed with pre-existing. We changed them, and that's the way it is.
But the current code would read the same way. We had kept, if we were operating under the old regulation, we didn't change anything.
Yeah, we did. Onset Hut Row, you said the I-3 remains 5 feet. Okay, what I'm getting at is, some of those sheds in that area are actually at 10 feet. I know for a fact they are. So they can now store stuff 5 feet from the property line, 5 feet to their building. We didn't get anything. I mean, I know you can't write the perfect ordinance.
You want me to read all this?
No, you don't. I just, like I said, if we go this route, and it's gonna be everybody, from the big retail to the little guy to the whatnot, we'll get crucified, but
We'll get through it.
we'll get crucified. And
The one question I just had, and maybe could have asked for some clarification on, is who's going to take the lead on it if this is the route?
Which route, John?
If the route is to recommend to the city council, well, if the city council recommends taking a more active role in enforcement, who's doing that?
Well, that's a suggestion. I don't know if unless they're going to start removing people, from positions, it's ultimately, again, it's up to your office with Elwood, the police, and the city attorney to decide what's getting enforced. And, if we're getting to a point where because complaints are being made, we're going to be doing enforcing, I guess we're going to be doing enforcing. We can keep the council posted on what's going on, and again, this would be the city attorney who's got to prosecute these, or, I suppose one option would be to seek an injunction or some kind of civil relief, in which case, if you prevail, you might get awarded your expert witness fees, and you have to try and collect them. But anyway, those are all tactical decisions that would be made on a case-by-case basis. But at some point, if there's going to be a bill submitted for $50,000 for expert witness fees, and the council says, what's going on here, then they would need to know if you want to keep the ordinance this way and you want it enforced consistently, this is what it costs to do that. If you want to change the ordinance because you think it's too oppressive, it's whatever, it's that the costs of doing it aren't justified by the results, ultimately, to have, to not have materials in a setback in an industrial zone. And it's not worth spending this kind of money and alienating all these businesses and driving them out of New Ulm or whatever the consequences are. That's a decision for the council to make. In the meantime, we all do our jobs.
I think the council, if we are talking those staggering numbers, because I know it's gonna happen. Every place in New Ulm is gonna get cited.
Yeah, if we are directed to move forward with it, I'm gonna have to prepare a request for proposals, and that's gonna have to be authorized by city council too. So that's kinda, if that's the route we're gonna go, that's something I'm gonna have to work on, and it's almost step one, and that's not budgeted. I have no budget for and licensed surveyor fees or anything like that. So it's another thing to keep in mind, because we just don't know what that number is going to be. It really depends on the number of cases that go to trial.
It's
So
gonna be high.
sure.
Well, again, considering when we're doing this meeting and the changes that are going to be happening, as Chris said at the onset, you might want to be deferring any recommendations to the council until you get the advice of the attorneys who are the ones who are going to be in court dealing with this and making the decisions on how to enforce it, whether it's, seeking civil injunctive relief or a criminal charge or however they want to do it.
Well, which way do we want to go?
No.
Can the city be sued by a property owner if he or she files a complaint and they don't get the complaint cleaned up and we have an active ordinance?
They could probably try and get, and you're asking me to give you advice about what someone could do against the city, I'm pretty reluctant to do that.
But it could happen.
They could try, yeah,
It could
that's the kind
happen.
of,
That's what I'm asking.
people ask me every day, can I get sued? And the answer is always, yeah. Anybody can sue anybody on anything. The question is, do you have any risk of losing or any exposure on it? So I'm not real concerned about that. But I think, as Dave has said, I think everybody with the city feels strongly we need to be consistent in how we deal with people in situations.
Can we be consistent by that we're trying to address letters, notifying them what's in violation?
Well, I
and
mean, as
seeing
far
if
as,
that
as far
starts-
as how, I mean, I think, the course that we follow is you have to look at it case by case and, okay, we got a complaint, it's investigated, is there a violation or not? If there is a violation, then we move into the enforcement mode, which typically is going to start with letters before we start taking people to court or filing charges or things like that. And it's just going to be a lot of letters if we have to, start trying to enforce this, and then it's going to depend on each property owner how they're going to respond.
I mean, do we have to, Roger, go that far? We're gonna have to appoint somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, so they're gonna roll in.
Yeah. I mean,
A lot of them.
technically, John and Elwood, because it's code violation, not.
Well,
In the setback,
I would let
that's-
Elwood
yeah.
speak for himself, but I know he's a busy guy.
Yep.
And between the existing things that he personally has to do just for public safety,
Yeah.
for inspections and reviewing, the building permits, everything else, I don't know that he would have time to go out and personally investigate 15 new complaints on this issue.
Oh, Roger, 15? Nah.
That's
No.
I'm just saying, I think, that's going to be an issue. Either it's going to take a long time for them all to get investigated, or the city would have to be looking at adding some new staff to do all this.
Yeah, I think I can somewhat speak on Elwood's behalf, as we've had meetings on this previously, but he doesn't have the time to do this additional code work, and he's gone as far as to say, if this is the direction in which we're going to go, we will need more staff. That was his stance before, so I'm pretty comfortable saying that on his behalf.
Well, maybe, Chris, you can bring it to a work session, what you might think you need for budgeting for the future for, in another year, stuff like that for code enforcement. And waive the council as option A and B, that, if we're gonna have code enforcement, it's gonna take X amount of staff, time, and, that way the council sees, dependent, which way, some direction, caseload's not there. I mean,
I think it's important to
Well,
note
it's
that
brought
this
up
won't be a one-time thing. I mean, this is going to be
Ongoing.
forever, yes.
yeah, and Elwood's come before us before and saying that they, they're thin already,
I would agree, and, it's one of those things where I look at it, this really isn't an issue in the city. We have businesses that have been doing it for a long time, like you said. Now, would the easier thing be to look at industrial and business and really look at setbacks and why we have them, what they're there for? And it saves the city survey fees, saves the city, hiring another person, because what's the return at the end of the day? What's the return on investment on that? All the money that we would invest in doing this when really we don't get any complaints on this specific topic, But again, we can present it, we'll take it to council at a work study session, again, that we can look at the May work study session and really break down those figures. It'll be on us to put those numbers together, and present to council and see what direction they would like us to go. Like you said, option A, B, C, whatever that looks like, and let the council kind of give us a direction and we can go from there. So, yeah, we'll look at hiring staff, enforcement, look at, what rewriting looks like, and we'll present it to council and see what direction they want us to go. Sound like a plan for everyone?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, concerns? All right, with that, meeting adjourned.
Thanks.
Hey, Roger.